After that, the steel glove on her hand that was emitting blue light was the size of a watermelon. Then, she limped toward the meatball. Lumiere hugged the bomb and went around it. Matthew found a high place to land, transformed into his human form, and grabbed the remote control tightly. He didn't say much. At this moment, he only needed to listen to Bobo's orders. Although Miss Machinist seemed unreliable and kept threatening to blow up, there had never been a real explosion. Matthew had full trust in her. After swallowing a few crocodiles lurking in the swamp, the ball was once again attracted by the scent of a living person, and it rolled towards Bobo. Bobo wasn't afraid at all. As she walked, she adjusted the boxing gloves in her hands. The surface of the gloves was silvery white and metallic. The blue light that flickered from time to time gave people a quiet and manic feeling. In the blink of an eye, the distance between the two sides was less than 50 meters. Bobo knelt on one knee, pressing her right glove onto the ground. At the same time, a mechanical voice came from the glove. Beginning level 1 charging. In an instant, the blue light on the boxing glove turned from light blue to a light that was almost navy blue. The ground nearby began to tremble slightly. The ball rolled over violently. Lumiere, who was on the flank, seized the opportunity and quickly approached. He stuffed the bomb in his arms into the abomination's mouth. When he turned around and left, he even heard the sound of something breaking his teeth. The ball moved slightly towards Lumiere by half a meter, but the latter was running too fast, and it rolled towards Bobo. On the branch, Matthew's thumb was pressed against the push rod, and his breathing was tight. As the ball rolled closer and closer, the undead let out excited howls, and countless hands reached out to Bobo. However, Bobo's expression was extremely calm. 20 meters. 12 meters. 8 meters. She finally stood up with difficulty and used all her strength to throw a beautiful uppercut at the sphere of the death. As she hit it, she shouted, "Matthew minus." The hysterical roar pierced through the swamps and forests, startling countless birds. Bang! The hill-sized sphere of the death was sent flying into the sky by this uppercut. Matthew stared at the trajectory of the sphere. When he estimated that it was about to reach the highest point, he pushed hard. 2 seconds later, the ball exploded silently. The remains of countless undead were scattered into the sky like mud. In the next moment, inside the sphere of the death, a pitch-black, spinning spherical crystal that looked like a black hole was exposed to everyone. The violent explosion destroyed the crystal and triggered an even stronger airflow fluctuation. In an instant, a black tornado formed at the center of the explosion. The remains of the undead that were about to fall due to gravity were instantly sucked up and wrapped up by the edge of the tornado. Whoosh! 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 A strong wind blew near the swamp. Everyone looked at the sky in shock. The tornado in the sky was getting bigger and bigger. Zombies and skeletons were dancing crazily at the edge of the tornado, accompanied by the heads of Django people, the tails of Nagas, the hearts of trolls, and a large amount of flesh and blood. Oh my god. I was actually running with this thing just now. Lumiere raised his head and looked at his hands with lingering fear. The tornado stayed in the air for a few minutes, moving southwest at a high speed with a large number of corpses and branches of the undead. 10 minutes later. Evening Wind Pier. Old Ollie was drowsily leaning against a coconut tree. Little Rock, who was playing with the crab, saw the tornado in the distant sky and shouted, "Grandpa, Grandpa! Look over there! Oh my god, you won't believe what I just saw." Old Ollie was woken up by his grandson and changed his posture unhappily. "Don't make a fuss, child. I've lived my entire life. What haven't I seen?" Little Rock didn't know how to describe the scene in front of him. He pointed at the sky and repeated, "Tornado. Zombies. Zombies. Tornado." Ollie was annoyed by his noise. He turned his head to look at the sky. The next second, he jumped up. After staring blankly at the horizon for a few seconds, old Ollie suddenly ran toward the dock. "Get up, Shwen Kunzi. You won't believe what I just saw." The old man shouted as he ran. On the shore, a huge turtle buried its head in the water and blew bubbles contentedly. "Don't make a fuss, Ollie. I've lived for hundreds of years. What have I not seen before?" But he still turned his head curiously. When he saw the tornado carrying hundreds of thousands of undead passing by in the distance, along with some zombie residue, animal bones and internal organs, resin, or mud, his neck suddenly stretched 20 meters long. "I've really never seen this before." Shwen Kunzi cried out in surprise and hurriedly dived into the water. He could vaguely hear a voice coming from the water minus. Wifey, you definitely won't believe it. One evening, The undead tornado swept across the northern shore of the Gold Coast. It was only at night that the tornado turned from the southwest of Condor City into the Arana Sea and gradually disappeared from everyone's sight. Prompt: you have destroyed Blinken's heavenly sphere of death and the negative energy gravity crystal. Blinken's mental power was damaged. Hatred of Dragon Lich Sect +10. You have unintentionally created a weather phenomenon, the undead tornado. A few Django people and an elemental watched the entire battle between the brave party, you, and the undead heavenly sphere. They might spread their sight of the battle in oral form. Soon, more and more stories about the undead tornado will appear. Bards will sing about you, young heroes will idolize you, and wealthy forces will consider recruiting you. Your party, Lumiere Bobo, has Southern Legends +1. Your regional legend points, Rainforest +3, Gold Coast +1, Swamp City +1. Naga Race +1. Very good. You destroyed my heavenly sphere of the death. I'd like to have a chat with you before I'm completely enraged. But I will only give you 3 sentences. Now, begin. A black shadow quickly appeared in front of the 3 of them. Blinken said with a sinister expression. In Anger, negotiations were a common occurrence. The people of Anger were so passionate about negotiations that they were obsessed with it. Whether it was a civilized society or an adventure in the countryside, when people encountered conflicts, their first reaction was to choose negotiations. And even if the initial negotiations failed, in most cases, both sides would agree to start a second round of negotiations and add a mediator role in the subsequent negotiations. In Rolling Stone Town, the position of mediator was often held by the town's respected people. In a big city like Jilu City, the government even had a special negotiation organization to manage disputes among the people. Matthew had once read the work of a senior mediator, who wrote on the title page, "How can we ensure a better resolution of the dispute?" There were 3 things to do. Before the negotiations, one had to ensure that the strength of both sides was equal. During negotiations, use all sorts of methods. After negotiations, don't be too hung up with the outcome. The first 2 points were easy to understand, but the third point seemed to Matthew to mean something like this. Even though it was the consensus of most people in Anger to use negotiations to solve all problems, there were still many people who did not care about ethics. There were also examples in history of people who went back on their words and backstabbed the next day. Therefore, even if the outcome of the negotiations had already become a fact, they had to be more careful and vigilant. This was Matthew's first negotiation. He was facing a level 20 big shot. Although the Blinken in front of him was most likely a water mirror image, the law of death in the morning still left a deep impression on Matthew. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't nervous. But at this moment, Matthew knew that he had to muster up the courage to face him. If he showed any signs of fear, this negotiation would be lost. He walked up and maintained a safe distance. He said calmly, "There are no dragon tombs in this rainforest." Blinken sneered. Now, the second sentence. Matthew's expression did not change. The internal strife of the Sandstorm Bandits is most likely a self-directed farce. Blinken was getting impatient. The third sentence. Matthew's heart was slightly stirred. Blinken's reaction was beyond his expectations. He thought that the 2 pieces of information he had thrown out would at least make the other party refute, but the other party was completely indifferent. Blinken's attitude changed Matthew's train of thought. He reacted quickly and decisively to change the content of the third sentence. "I have a legendary existence with me." Blinken wanted to raise his right hand subconsciously, but he stopped before the staff could reach 15 degrees. "A legend. Do you think I'm a child? Do you think I am so easily deceived?" He stared coldly at Matthew. Seeing the other party's attitude, Matthew finally heaved a sigh of relief. When Blinken was about to raise his staff, he was ready to use his undead body. Soldier and the Drifter were already in position. As long as the enemy showed the slightest intention to act rashly, the 2 immortal assassins would immediately attack. Fortunately, Blinken finally reacted to Matthew's words. Even though the content was still questionable. However, at least there were signs of negotiations between the 2 sides. "There's no point in lying. I don't think it'll be difficult for you to verify my words," Matthew replied calmly. Suspicion flashed in Blinken's eyes. The next moment, he suddenly took out a skull from his pocket. There was a faint soul fire within the skull, which was obviously different from the ordinary undead. Matthew could feel a rich life force. It was rich but very weak, as if it could be extinguished at any time. Blinken carefully held the skull in his arms, then gently stroked its forehead and cheekbones, and asked gently, "Emma, my Emma?" He said, "They have a legend with them." Hearing Blinken's voice, the skull seemed to wake up. She flew out of Blinken's arms, spun in the air, and landed in his palm. Why didn't I wake up with my lover's kiss this time? My Ken, do you not love me anymore? The skull looked at Blinken with some resentment. Blinken quickly hugged her and kissed her forehead. I'm sorry, baby. I'm just a little anxious. His tone was gentle, his movements were gentle, and even his kiss was filled with love. I like your kiss. It reminds me of when we were still in love. You were so young and radiant back then, but now you're old. The negative energy has corroded your body and brain. Skull, Emma said affectionately. Blinken coughed. We can talk about this when we get back, baby. I'm negotiating with someone right now. Is that so? Emma turned 180 degrees, glanced at Matthew and the others, then turned back and said to Blinken, I'm afraid what that child said is true. He has a guardian god on him, and his level is very high. It's probably not something an ordinary legend can do. It's at least a superior legend. Superior legend? Blinken was shocked. There aren't many superior legends in the entire South. Oh, my poor lover, this rotten world has corrupted your flesh, necromancy has blurred your vision. Can't you see the obvious mark on the Patronus? Emma asked worriedly. Blinken's eyes shone with a bright white light. After a few seconds, he frowned and said, Ronan. But I heard that he was trapped in the astral plane. Emma persuaded. But he won't be trapped in the astral plane forever. You know what he's capable of. Your current judgment worries me. Promise me, don't let the negative energy continue to erode your brain. It's the sexiest organ in your body and also my favorite. Blinken's facial muscles twitched slightly, but he soon understood. I'll be careful, Emma. The skull looked particularly worried. She turned to Matthew and the others. Let me talk to that child. I'm more suitable to negotiate with normal people than you. Blinken took a deep breath and didn't say anything else. He tacitly agreed to Emma's words. Hello, my name is Emma. What's yours? The skull looked very friendly. Matthew replied politely, Hello, madam. My name is Matthew. Nice to meet you, Matthew. Emma said vivaciously. The world has always had a big misunderstanding about Blinken. In fact, he is a good child, always has been, but he is not very good at expressing himself. When he was still a magic apprentice, a few troublemakers had hidden all the frogs for dissection because they hated the dissection class the next day. When Blinken learned of this, he went to them and tried to get them to hand over the frog. The reason was that he did not want his group to fall behind the other groups of magic apprentices. However, the children were too naughty. Not only did they not want to hand over the frog, but they also threatened Blinken that if he exposed this matter, they would turn him into a frog and throw him into the women's toilet. Emma's tone was filled with nostalgia. Matthew realized that this skull seemed to be very important to Blinken, so he played along. What happened after that? Emma sighed. They annoyed Blinken and refused to tell him where they hid the frogs, so the angry young Blinken used malicious transfiguration to turn them all into frogs and put them in the material cabinet in the anatomy class. It wasn't until the next day that the teacher noticed the abnormality. The unlucky, mischievous ones were not cut open, but Blinken received a big punishment. Later, when I found out about this, I took the initiative to talk to him. Only then did I know that he just wanted to take a good anatomy class. How could you say anything bad about such a hardworking child? Matthew was speechless. It seemed that Emma had a very large leeway for Blinken. At this moment, a voice came from behind Matthew. Emma. Are you Ms. Emma? Were you a professor of prophecy at the Pharaoh City Magic Academy? Yes, I remember you giving Mr. Blinken a lesson. As expected, Zai immediately appeared after the fight. It seemed like he knew Emma well. Emma replied happily. Yes, I didn't expect that someone would still remember me. After my husband died, I heard that Blinken had defected from the Alliance of Seven Saints. From then on, I was depressed and passed away not long after. But very soon, Blinken dug me out of the coffin and found a way to preserve my memory and wisdom. I'm sorry to meet you like this. Do I look evil? Zai whimpered, not knowing how to answer. Seeing this, Matthew calmly changed the topic. As you said, Mr. Blinken used to be a decent person, but what he did today is not so decent. This morning, he used the Book of Blasphemy to pollute the Black Banyan's dream and took away the verdant branch of the soul of the rainforest. After that, he ran amok in the rainforest. The creatures in this area were very uneasy. Everyone was afraid of who he would attack next. This is the purpose of my negotiation. I really hope that this matter can end peacefully. But if Mr. Blinken continues to be stubborn, I'm afraid it will be difficult to resolve the conflict between us through negotiations. Emma immediately said. I will ask him to return the verdant branch, but not now. We still need this thing. As for the Black Banyan Dream, I'm very sorry. I promise you that Blinken will never blaspheme the Black Banyan Dream again. Did you hear that, little Ken? Blinken revealed a helpless expression. Emma, that kid is threatening me. Emma instantly raised her voice. I asked you if you heard me. You did go overboard this morning. Look at how scared that little fox is. It's already good that I didn't ask you to come and apologize. Blinken said angrily. I understand. After this, I will return the verdant branch. I also promise that I will not profane the Black Banyan's dream realm in the future. Very good. Emma yawned in satisfaction. She said to Matthew. You and little Ken are both necromancers. You should have a lot in common, so there's no need to be enemies. Now that little Ken has made a concession, you can have a good talk. Don't be too impulsive, young man. All right, little Ken, I'm a little sleepy. Send me back. Blinken didn't hesitate. He eagerly lifted the skull and kissed it 3 times before reluctantly putting Emma back into his arms. After Emma left, the warmth on Blinken's face instantly disappeared, replaced by a fierce and vicious face. Brat, don't think I'm as easy to talk to as Emma. I've already given in. I can promise you and the soul of the rainforest behind you that I won't harm the creatures here as much as possible. But I want that piece of land in the west of the rainforest. I need the factory to fulfill my wish, so tell those natives to stay away from my factory. Otherwise, I don't know what will happen. Also, my people and I will be walking around the rainforest for the next period of time. If those ferocious beasts or natives take the initiative to attack me, don't blame me for being ruthless. If you can agree to this, I can give Emma face and stay out of your way for the time being. Matthew knew that this negotiation would not end well. He simply said vaguely, I'm not sure if the soul of the rainforest will accept such conditions, especially after you robbed her, but I'll convey these words to her. Blinken sneered, she will accept it. Brat, I don't know what the soul of the rainforest promised you, but no matter how generous the reward is, it's not as important as your life. You're not so lucky to have a flying squirrel be a sacrifice for you, right? Matthew's heart skipped a beat. So, he knew everything that happened in Black Banyan's dream realm after he left. What do you want to do in the rainforest? The tomb of the dragon. It doesn't exist at all. He tried to pry more information out of Blinken. However, Blinken only smiled faintly. Don't ask so many questions, kid. Don't do useless things. I've already sent my people away when we were negotiating. As for me, you should know that the person in front of you is just a mirror image. The real me is already thousands of miles away. As he spoke, he turned around and walked away. After 10 steps, he suddenly turned around and looked at Matthew solemnly. Forget it. Since we're both necromancers, I'll give you one last piece of advice. Matthew asked. What is it? When you wear a robe with tight cuffs, it's best to always roll up your sleeves to avoid affecting your spellcasting. Blinken said seriously. Also, the second button on the inner lining of your shirt is not fastened. Remember to button it immediately. After saying that, his figure immediately collapsed and turned into a puddle of water. Zaye came over. So, is this negotiation a success or a failure? Matthew did not answer. Instead, he quickly turned around and looked at Bobo, who was enduring the pain. Let's heal the wounded first. The sparkling emitting gloves were removed one by one and thrown into the pool beside the mud. White steam immediately rose from the water. After the 3 layers of the iron sheet were removed, Bobo's fair, small, and slightly fleshy fist was revealed. No burns, but there are some slight fractures. Matthew carefully examined her hand. As a necromancer, he was a natural surgeon. Not many professions dared to say that they knew bones in front of a necromancer. I've received professional training. How could I be scalded? Bobo blushed and said. But fractures are inevitable. Sure enough, the burden of level 1 charging is still too great for fists and gloves. But you all saw it just now, right? It's really cool, isn't it? Matthew smiled and nodded. Without hesitation, he took out a scroll from his inventory and tore it. The magic ripples were like fish swimming into Bobo's fists and wrists, while some of them flowed along her skin to other parts. Huh. The latter moved her wrist a little and found that the slight fracture on her hand had recovered, and the bruises on her skin had disappeared. Is that a basic external injury healing scroll? Was it expensive? Bobo asked hesitantly. Matthew smiled and shook his head. Seeing the embarrassed look on Bobo's face, he naturally wouldn't tell him that she was actually using an intermediate external injury healing scroll. Fortunately, this thing was not expensive in Bayan City. After all, necromancers were all skilled in surgery. This is an intermediate scroll. Zaye suddenly interrupted. Mr. Matthew, you're so rich. This scroll was sold for more than 120 gold coins in Condor City, and this was under the condition that people generally did not pay much attention to external injuries. Lumiere had no concept of money, so he listened with interest. Bobo didn't seem to have any reaction after hearing that. It was just that the color of the light on her helmet changed, looking very much like the neon lights in Matthew's previous life. Matthew casually explained, I did not buy it that expensively. After saying this, he wanted to pinch his thigh. Why did he only think about buying underwater breathing scrolls from Condor City and selling them inland? Why didn't he do the reverse with Bayan City and Jilu City? If what Zaye said was true, and this scroll that sold for 8 gold coins in Bayan City could be sold for more than 10 times the price in the Gold Coast, then Matthew had to open up this trade route that ran through the north and south. Of course, now was not the time to think about this. Even though Bobo's external injuries had been healed, everyone's spirit had been greatly drained after the battle just now. They urgently needed a break to relieve their mental and physical stress. Since the undead in the swamp were all taken away by the tornado, the Dragon Lich disciples had most likely withdrawn. Therefore, in theory, this was the safest place in the rainforest. Matthew and the others found a place to camp. He entrusted Zaye to stay in the temporary camp and asked Soldier to protect Bobo while he and Lumiere scouted the area. The journey was calm. Just as Matthew had guessed, there was not even a ghost in the depths of the swamp. He then asked Lumiere, if it were you, would you be able to accept such a negotiation result? Lumiere said uncertainly, I don't know. That necromancer is really strong. I can feel that if I were to face him one-on-one, I wouldn't be his match. However, if I let him plunder the rainforest like this, I will feel humiliated. Perhaps I can endure it for now, but those headhunter tribe people will definitely not let it go. Even if they have to fight to the last drop of blood, they will fight the Dragon Lich sect to the end. Matthew sighed. Then they will all become the necromancer's accomplices. Lumiere was speechless. He recalled the gigantic heavenly sphere from earlier. If not for Bobo's bomb, he really wouldn't know how to deal with it. I didn't mean to mock your clansmen. I also respect their courage, Matthew said in a deep voice. But before the second round of negotiations, it's best if they don't provoke Blinken. This will disrupt my plan. Lumiere nodded and asked, is there a second round of negotiations? Matthew said calmly. Perhaps it shouldn't be called the second round of negotiations. The next time we meet, there's a high chance that it'll be a life and death battle. Actually, this is inevitable because Blinken has no sincerity to negotiate with us at all. Lumiere asked in confusion. Didn't he promise the skull? I could tell he loved her very much. Matthew shook his head. I don't trust him at all for at least 2 reasons. First, why did Blinken come to the swamp? We saw the heavenly sphere just now. I suspect that he came for the undead here. This matter was ruined by us. Logically speaking, he should have killed us already, but he didn't do it at all. This meant that either he didn't care about the heavenly sphere of the death, or he might have another one. Matthew asked. You've been here before. Can you confirm that the undead on the sphere are all in the swamp? Lumiere revealed a look of recollection. I can't remember clearly. There are indeed a lot of undead in the swamp. Thinking about it carefully, although the heavenly sphere looks terrifying, there are not that many undead on the outer shell. If we really count them, it might not cover all the undead in the swamp. Matthew nodded and said, that's right. I believe that Blinken wouldn't do something meaningless. The heavenly sphere of the death is the purpose of his trip. It's a pity that I don't know much about this spell, but it doesn't seem to be an offensive spell at all. Or rather, offense is its side effect. He must have a greater purpose in making the heavenly sphere. Matthew speculated. Lumiere asked worriedly. If he really has another heavenly sphere of the death, isn't he stalling for time by negotiating with us? Matthew said. I'm afraid so. There's another reason why I can't trust him. That's Emma. Lumiere was shocked. But she looks very nice, Matthew said in a deep voice. It's because she's too nice. Don't you think her interaction with Blinken in front of us is a little too fake? Of course, there was also the possibility that their relationship was really that good. It was just that some of Emma's words made me uneasy. Lumiere still looked as if he could not believe that Emma's kindness was faked. But he listened very seriously. Matthew recalled. Emma said that Blinken was a good boy. In order to punish the students who hid the frogs, he used malicious transfiguration on those students and turned them into frogs. The story is not wrong. I just want to know how a magic apprentice, who is at most level 4, learned malicious transfiguration, which requires at least level 10 to master. Lumiere looked enlightened. Matthew walked forward quietly. Actually, there were still many suspicious points that he did not mention, including when Emma mentioned Suya. She seemed to have inadvertently pointed out that Suya's true form was a fox. This was very intriguing. The interaction between her and Blinken was completely controlled by the former. She thought of Blinken's inexplicable betrayal and his later participation in the Dragon Lich sect. Matthew even suspected that Emma was the mastermind. From another point of view, regardless of whether Matthew's guess was true or not, Blinken was unwilling to give up his activities in the rainforest, which meant that the negotiations had completely broken down. Not to mention Suya, Matthew himself would not allow the Dragon Lich sect to tarnish the rainforest, and he would not allow Blinken to barge into the tomb of the bright Sandalwood King. Looks like a fierce battle is inevitable. He thought about it. Matthew flipped open the divine power badge on his chest. The message from 2 hours ago was still shining brightly. 2 people, just this once. Never again. These were the goddess of moonlight's exact words. Asia agreed to help Matthew, but doing so was also a huge burden for her, who was getting weaker. She could not always support Matthew unconditionally. The meaning of this sentence was, I can help you next time. But you have to pay more. I wonder who Zeller will send over. If I were him, Lee Wiki would definitely take one spot. Who else would it be? It should be Zeller himself, right? Matthew was still guessing. Suddenly, a small house appeared in front of them. The cottage was surrounded by a fence, and there was a sign hanging on the front of the fence door. Dania's house, it's so strange, why must there be such a door sign? No one will come to visit me anyway. This is the residence of the undead girl, Dania. Matthew immediately perked up. He walked around the fence and found a dry garden behind the house. There was a huge stone in the garden. Matthew could sense the faint but clear life force on the stone at a glance. Stone elemental. Matthew instantly reacted. He was most likely the elemental who had been watching their battle with the undead sphere. However, Matthew did not act rashly. He went back to the main gate and cast a universal cantrip according to the rules of visiting necromancers in Bayan City. Puff. Matthew sprinkled a smear of bone powder on the fence door. A series of mournful cat meows came from the emerald green light. A few seconds later, a rough voice came from the garden. Why couldn't Dania find a boyfriend when she was around? She's been gone for God knows how many years, but men are coming to her door one after another. I really feel bad for my best friend. Ah, she's a necromancer. So, are you here for the collection that Dania left behind? The stone elemental yawned as she walked over. She stood on the inside of the fence and did not seem to have any intention of opening the door. She looked like she was in a bad mood and only wanted to be perfunctory. According to the rules, you can choose between quick Q&A or flying bird chess. Quick Q&A means I'll ask and you'll answer 3 questions. The thinking time should not exceed 20 seconds. I'll accept any reasonable answers but, of course, extra points for giving the optimal answer. If all 3 questions were answered correctly, or if a question was answered optimally, you could enter the door. Flying bird chess is a game with me. If you lose, you can get lost. If you win, you can enter the door. It's that simple. Matthew knew about flying bird chess, which was very popular in Bayan City. Unfortunately, he only knew how to plant trees and did not even know the basic rules. He could only choose quick Q&A. The stone elemental chuckled. First question, what is the profession that necromancers hate the most? Lumiere heaved a sigh of relief. He didn't think this question was very difficult. Necromancers naturally hated the nemesis of necromancers, such as paladins. Matthew thought for 2 seconds and replied, necromancer. The stone giant shuddered and instantly became spirited. What's your relationship with Dania? After explaining that he had never met Dania before, the stone elemental said regretfully. If you had come a few decades earlier, Dania might have been able to get rid of her single status successfully, and she wouldn't have become so perverted later. As she spoke, she pulled open the fence door. Matthew walked in, and Lumiere tactfully waited outside. Dania's cabin looked small, but the space inside was comparable to a castle. The floor was translucent. They were like floating tiles, transparent and full of texture. Matthew looked around and saw at least 100 rooms under his feet. Floating brick structure. This is the technology to build a floating city. Matthew was amazed by the interior of the hut. The stone elemental was already used to it. No, Dania doesn't have that kind of brain. She just tore down a library in a floating city and installed some of its parts here. She took a few steps on the floating bricks and muttered. Necromancer, male, below 30 years old, above 180 centimeters, looks very handsome according to human aesthetics. That's room 7. The stone elemental led Matthew to a smaller floating brick and stepped on it heavily. At the same time, she explained. Dania left different gifts for different people. They belong to different rooms, and each room has 3 to 20 items. You can only choose one of them as Dania's gift. Matthew's heart skipped a beat. Different groups of people. Even non-necromancers. If that was the case, he wanted Lumiere and Bobo to try their luck. The stone elemental yawned. Matthew was surprised. But I just saw some rooms with the logo of other professions. The stone elemental chuckled. That's why I said that she's gone perverted. She clearly set the rules that only necromancers are allowed to participate in flying bird chess and quick A&A, but in the end, she prepared gifts and rooms for all classes. Her mental state before she left was very confusing. I even suspect that she didn't want to leave anything good for her descendants, even necromancers. I think because she couldn't find a boyfriend in her lifetime, she left these behind as proof of her existence. As she spoke, she stomped on the tiles again. This time, the ladder finally sank slowly. Matthew came to a small storage room. On the table in the middle was a specimen of a chicken covered in black feathers. The label below it read, "This is the 1000000 of purgatory chicken born since the birth of purgatory." Of course, it's fake. Who would be so bored as to count chickens? For some reason, this sentence felt funny to Matthew. He smiled and looked away. There were 6 items on the shelf beside him. High-level negative energy stone, I'm lying to you. Do you think there are different levels of negative energy stones? A broom that doesn't know how to sweep the floor, but it can help you mop the floor when it's wet. It can also salivate. Isn't it amazing? A copy of the title deed to a house in Bayan City. When I bought the house, the agent told me that this is a permanent property right. Kill him if he was lying. Dania's paper crane, my Prince Charming, he. Spellbooks with spells written upside down and in reverse order, strongly recommended. This is a wonderful book, but remember to practice it upside down. L. Bloodstain pads, heave. When he saw the last item, Matthew really began to doubt Dania's mental state. How long had she been a shut-in to drive her crazy? The stone elemental's words seemed reasonable. This necromancer probably didn't want to leave something for her descendants but just wanted to find a sense of existence. Matthew used the elimination method to make a preliminary screening. The only options left were specimen of purgatory chicken, Bayan City land deed, and spellbook. Bayan City's title deed was actually quite good, but whether it was permanent property was really a question mark. If he took it back and it was a lie, it would be a huge loss. Matthew felt that there might be something hidden in the specimen of the purgatory chicken. Normally, the specimen was just a pretense. The egg in its stomach was the main point. It was a pity that Matthew did not have enough spiritual power now. Otherwise, he would have been able to see it clearly with a round of equalized perception. As for the spellbook, it was something that every mage would not neglect. Matthew pondered for a moment. In the end, he still chose to take the spellbook with him. Even if the book is written backwards, it's not impossible to decipher it. There's definitely no big mistake in choosing a spellbook, as long as it's not too trashy. After gradually understanding Dania's mental state, Matthew made this choice. Anyway, he didn't pay anything. He only answered a question. It was already good enough to get a small gift. After getting the spellbook, Matthew left the storage room under the lead of the stone elemental. If possible, please spread the news that Dania's hut has a gift among the necromancers. The stone elemental said as she sent the guest off. In the past, the edge of the swamp was filled with the undead left behind by Dania. No one could break in at all. It's a pity that her meticulous arrangements have completely become a pantomime that no one can appreciate. At that time, I advised her that if she wanted more people to understand her, she shouldn't set such a high threshold. However, she refused. She insisted that only necromancers who could break through the undead in the outer circle were qualified to receive her gift. I couldn't understand her thoughts at all. Why would she still force these powerful necromancers to play her mini-games then? Perhaps this was the reason why she could not find a boyfriend in her life. As her best friend, I feel sorry for her. She's actually a very good person. It's just that her mind has been affected by negative energy. Young man, you have to be careful too. The path of undying is not something that ordinary people can control. Matthew nodded with gratitude. Of course, he knew about the negative energy's influence on humans, especially on the brain, heart, and other organs. Just like how arsonists always found it difficult to restrain their desire to set fire, necromancers were also easily tempted by negative energy and gradually fell into the abyss. Generally speaking, this process would be significantly accelerated after the 4th rank. This was also the objective reason why high-level necromancers always gave people the impression that strangers were not allowed to approach them. However, Matthew was different. He didn't know if it was because of the tree, but he could feel that his body organs were protected by the power of nature. The negative energy caused little corrosion to his body, but in a sense, it stimulated the growth of the power of nature. The two powers had formed a temporary balance in his body. Now that he had inherited the art of equilibrium, he did not have to worry about it in the short term. Instead, it was the stone elemental lady's words that piqued his interest. So, was your relationship with Ms. Dania very close? Of course, we were best friends. Otherwise, why would I take the time to help her clean up and look after this house? You don't think that I'm like those silly undead, that I'm also a slave of Dania, do you? My home is in the stone elemental plane, and I just like to travel in the human world. The two of them walked to the fence, and the stone elemental stretched again. I need to catch up on my sleep later. I have a dance party to attend at SDG Island tonight. Matthew was stunned for a moment when he heard the name SDG Island. Unfortunately, the stone elemental lady had already closed the fence door and quickly went to the backyard garden to sleep. Everything was safe near the camp. The swamp was humid, so Zai thoughtfully lit 2 bonfires and hand-made 2 roadblocks. It was obvious that other than not being able to find this person during battle, this ace spy wasn't bad at all. Matthew found Bobo in a tent with a Spanish flag. When he entered the tent, Matthew was stunned for a moment. Apart from the helmet, the heavy armor had been stripped off to the side. Bobo was only wearing a white cotton singlet, and a pair of white shorts made of the same material hung from her waist. She had shrunk a lot and looked even more petite. However, Bobo seemed to be in good spirits. She was half squatting on the ground, hammering away at the joints of her armor with a wrench that was bigger than her arm. Are you all right? Matthew looked away uncomfortably. Bobo's voice was a little dejected. Unless you can give me some steel, screws, and a super workbench. Damn it, if only I had stolen the workbench that was nailed to the door next door when I left Cyberdragon. Ding Ding's workbench is portable and can be expanded to this size. As she spoke, she gestured in front of Matthew. Unfortunately, Bobo's arm span was too short. Matthew couldn't imagine how big the workbench was. He asked casually, "Who is Ding Ding?" Bobo proudly puffed out her chest and said, "He's my neighbor. He's a little brat who only knows how to forge iron. He's about the same age as me and has had a crush on me since he was young. However, it's impossible for me to accept him because he's not even taller than me." Matthew smiled and said, "That's a pity, but he still has a chance to grow taller in the future, right?" Bobo shook her head and said, "He has no chance. He's a real dwarf. Most of the Cyberdragon citizens are dwarves. Occasionally, there will be goblins and fairies. There are too few humans like me." As she spoke, she looked up at Matthew with some longing. "Aren't you necromancers very knowledgeable about bones? Can you help me see if I can still grow taller? My requirements are not high. I'll be satisfied if I can be 1.5 meters, no, 1.4 meters tall." Matthew coughed twice. "I'll take a look at you next time. I'm very tired today and I'm going back to rest. I just came to see you before I rest." All right. Bobo shook her head and went back to fiddling with her armor, wearing a huge helmet that didn't match her petite figure. 2 hours later, Matthew opened his eyes. He loosened his muscles and bones, then took out a few tea leaves and put them in his mouth to chew. A short break wouldn't allow him to fully recover his mental strength, but at least he could use some spells. He was not in a hurry to leave his tent. Instead, he took out the spellbook and prepared to read it carefully. Then, he flipped open the title page. Warning: the incantations in this book have been reversed by me and written backwards. Reading it may cause mental trauma. Do not read it unless you are seeking death. Matthew was unmoved, but he still carefully flipped to the second page. But what if this is a spellbook that doesn't need to be read? Congratulations, you're in luck. This is a spellbook published by the Feast Sect Lodge. Don't flip to the back. You can't understand the incantation at the back, just obediently enjoy this delicious food. Right, the incantation was food is the most important thing. Remember to be sincere. If you fail once, read it a few more times. Your forever ghost girl, Dania. Feast Sect Lodge. Matthew was surprised and delighted. He quickly turned to the last page of the book and found the unique emblem of the arcane wilderness and the Feast Sect Lodge in the corner. Is this really a gift left behind by an old lady in her 70s or 80s? That was true. After staying at home for a lifetime, it was normal for one to still be childlike. Matthew stroked the spellbook's spine with joy. The Feast Sect Lodge was an organization from the arcane wilderness, which was independent of the material world and a magical plane full of active magic power. The natives of the arcane wilderness were great fairies, elf dragons, flower demons, and tree demons. They were all innate spellcasters, and they had the innate spellcasting ability that was not inferior to intermediate mages. Among the great fairies, there was a group of people who were committed to promoting the innate spellcasting ability. They believed that learning spells were too hard and that spellcasters should take a different approach and master the innate spellcasting ability like the fairies. The Feast Sect Lodge was a product of a similar concept. Every year, this organization would regularly publish some special spellbooks to spellcasting organizations in the material world and other dimensions in exchange for money, materials, and, more importantly, influence. The special feature of these spellbooks was that they were not meant for reading but for eating. As long as you eat a spellbook of this type, you will be able to master a spell within 15 minutes at most. Moreover, this spell belongs to the category of innate spellcasting and enjoys various additional spell check bonuses. This made the spellbooks of the Feast Sect Lodge extremely popular. Due to the limited production of the lodge, many times, even members of large spellcasters organizations might not be able to get a copy in their lifetime. How could Matthew not be surprised? Praise Dania. He said from the bottom of his heart. Food is the most important thing. He chanted the incantation sincerely again. The spellbook began to change gradually. At this moment, someone outside the tent asked softly, Matthew, do you have anything to eat? I'm hungry. It was Bobo's voice. Wait a moment. Matthew put down the spellbook and took out some biscuits from his luggage. He came to the tent door and handed them to Bobo. Do you think this is enough? Take it and share it with everyone. I still have some things to deal with. Bobo took the large handful of biscuits and counted them happily. Matthew turned around and walked back, not realizing the tent flap was not closed fully. Then, he picked up the spellbook. Food is the most important thing. Matthew read it again sincerely. This time, the spellbook's transformation speed increased drastically. It quickly turned from a book into a black lump that looked like a stack of several donuts. There was also a beautiful spell note hanging on it. Congratulations on winning the lottery. This book records a highly rare spell, and we believe that only the rarest food combinations are worthy of this spell. So as you can see, this is a chocolate-flavored, hoop-shaped delicacy. Please enjoy. Feast Sect Lodge, Head Chef, ZZ. Matthew's mouth twitched slightly. At this distance, he could still smell the rich fragrance of chocolate. Forget it. I'll endure it. He took a big bite, and it tasted really delicious. Outside the tent. After eating a few biscuits, Bobo felt a little thirsty, so she walked to Matthew's door. Suddenly, her body trembled as she saw an unbelievable scene. You gave us biscuits, and you ate that? Bobo asked in a trembling voice. Matthew didn't react immediately. Oh. This is chocolate-flavored. It is not bad. Bobo was stunned for a moment. She, who had always been strong, couldn't hold it in this time. She covered her mouth, and tears began to flow out. Matthew saw her expression and finally realized what had happened. He finished the food quickly and was about to explain. But at this moment, a huge amount of information surged into his mind. Hint, you have mastered the innate spellcasting ability, Instigation. Instigation, you can fight with other necromancers for control of the undead and have a higher chance of winning. If you succeed, you will receive a second cast of Instigation without exhaustion within a short period of time. In the dark and damp cave, the flickering torches drew shadows on the walls like demons. In the middle of a rare square altar, the sphere of the death, which had been cast with the shrinking spell, slowly disappeared into a holy white light. Immediately after, a stone brick floated up from the base of the altar. The stone brick shook violently in the air, making a rustling sound. A large amount of dust and stone chips fell from the brick. Very quickly, the outer shell of the stone brick was shaken off, revealing a few purple pages wrapped inside. He saw those pages. Blinken, who was guarding the center of the altar, looked excited. He solemnly took out a book from his bosom. Its outer shell was as hard as iron, and the cover was a palm with 6 fingers. SHHH. The book and the pages each emitted a piercing sound as if the water temperature of a kettle had reached a critical point. 3 seconds later, the page completely broke free from the stone brick and smoothly merged into the book in Blinken's hand. In an instant, the palm with only 6 fingers suddenly reached out from the cover and grabbed Blinken's neck. The latter's eyes bulged, and the veins on his temples bulged. The few people around the altar were indifferent to this scene. They just coldly watched the change on the altar. The purple palm seemed to have a special magic power. It sealed all of Blinken's power so that the latter couldn't resist at all. At the crucial moment, a skull flew out of Blinken's arms. The skull slammed into the base of the 6-fingered palm. At the same time, pitch-black negative energy shot out from Emma's eyes. They were like dark vipers that wrapped around the 6-fingered palm. Then, they exerted force and tightened. 10 seconds passed. The 6-fingered palm suddenly collapsed. Blinken lost his balance and fell to his knees. He panted heavily, but his right hand that was holding the purple book never relaxed. Stay alert at all times, little Ken. There are many people here who wish for your death. Emma said faintly. Blinken smiled, relieved. I know. I finally got the second book of blasphemy. I have a chance to resurrect more of your body parts. Hearing this, Emma only said coldly, you can say that after you've done it. With that, she burrowed into Blinken's arms. Blinken looked down at the direction Emma had disappeared to. His eyes flashed with deep infatuation and a little disappointment. He grabbed the book tightly and stood up. He came to the edge of the altar and said to a huge shadow. Was that a pleasant cooperation? A hoarse voice came from the shadows. You seem very weak now. Blinken frowned. A man and a woman came towards him. The man was a mutant with an elephant's trunk, and the woman was a drow warrior with a hot figure. They followed a man in the shadows. He just made a deal with the Lord and sacrificed a finished heavenly sphere of the death to obtain the other 1/5 of the Book of Blasphemy. As far as I know, although the Book of Blasphemy is powerful, it will constantly bite its master. His strength was originally suppressed to around level 18, and now, I dare to bet that he's not at tier 5 at all. The elephant trunk man excitedly held a slender wooden stick and said, Boss, why don't we kill him? There was a long silence in the shadows. Blinken said coldly. Don't be stupid. The master behind you wouldn't dare to offend me like this. Moreover, at this juncture, do you still want to offend the Dragon Lich sect? The man in the shadows laughed. I'm not afraid of offending the Dragon Lich sect, but I won't attack you. After all, we used to be friends. The elephant trunk man wanted to say something, but he was pulled away by the drow warrior. Blinken let out a long sigh of relief. He was indeed very weak now. In order to suppress the restless Book of Blasphemy, his strength was less than 60% of his usual strength. If these people really attacked, he would pay a heavy price regardless of whether he lived or died. Fortunately, the person in the shadows let him go. Blinken hurried away with the book in his arms. It wasn't until he walked away from the altar and activated a preset teleportation gate that he finally regained his provocative confidence. He turned around and said, If you fall into my hands next time, I will consider letting you off. Also, your altar foundation is an irregular square. Won't the god you serve blame you for this, Anderson? The person in the shadow suddenly became agitated. My name isn't Anderson. As he spoke, he slowly walked out of the shadows. Blinken only took a glance, and deep shock flashed in his eyes. Even with his experience in necromancy, he had never seen such a strange creature. Only one head was left intact. The frame below the neck was made up of bones of different lengths and qualities. In order to prevent the bones from being incompatible, the person who pieced them together used a large amount of magic glue at the joints. The reason why he barely looked like a human was because his bones were wrapped in chains. These iron chains seemed to have a life of their own, and they wrapped around his body irregularly. On his 4 limbs, there were 8 iron chains hanging on the ground, so as long as this person moved slightly, there would be a rustling sound. With Blinken's eyesight, it was not difficult to see that these living chains were taken from the purgatory chain demons. From now on, I only have one name, and that is Avenger. Anderson's face was filled with hatred. The part of his head that could barely prove his identity as a gnoll was also wrapped in some fine iron chains. As he spoke, the barbs at the end of the chains would occasionally pierce into his scalp. This was a painful experience for ordinary people, but he did not react at all. How did you become like this? Blinken asked in shock. He had a little friendship with Anderson, or else he would not have risked his life to make a deal with the Order of Calamity. However, when he saw Anderson's current appearance, even Blinken, who specialized in the study of body reconstruction, found it hard to accept. It was the Lord and Father who gave me a second life. Anderson's face was filled with devotion. The Lord reconstructed my head, and Father gave me a piece of bone from every brother in the church. He also used the power of the chain demon to reconstruct my body. I have become stronger than before. Don't worry about me, Blinken. You should worry about yourself. You're too weak now. I can still restrain my subordinates, but when you return to the Dragon Lich sect, the people under you might not listen to you. Blinken snorted and regained his cool. You don't have to worry about that. The Dragon Lich sect has a strict hierarchy and is very stable internally, unlike the Order of Calamity, who think that you have the help of a righteous god and are so arrogant. The elephant trunk man cut in angrily as if to defend his boss. I dare you to say one more thing. Blinken mocked. Has anyone ever told you that your nose is extremely similar to a penis? After saying that, he took the opportunity before the elephant man could react and walked directly into the portal. Who knew that in the next second? He heard the elephant trunk man laugh in a daze. You're so strange. Why are you suddenly praising me? Blinken's figure disappeared completely. The drow warrior Lara pressed her forehead with her hand speechlessly. He was mocking you. The elephant trunk man was shocked. Really? Lara rolled her eyes. Why did Father send me with teammates like you? Strong but dumb. The elephant trunk man chuckled. He eagerly ran to Lara's side. His elephant trunk shook as he wanted to rub against Lara's thigh, but he was almost cut off by the other party's knife. He didn't mind being almost hurt by Lara. He just smiled and asked, Lara, why do you think we're paired together? Could it be that your ex also likes thighs like me? Lara coldly put the scimitar back into the weapon sheath on her thigh. You'd better control your nose. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that I won't have a third teammate soon. Secondly, I said something wrong just now. Sinwok is not the same as you. He is much stronger than you. After saying this, she looked at Anderson, whose chains were shaking. The transaction is complete. Our mission has been completed. It's time to leave, an Avenger. Anderson gritted his teeth and said, Shush. I can sense his existence. It's the Lord who is guiding me. I see it, he will come here and walk into the trap. We're not going anywhere. We'll wait for him here. Only then did Lara notice that Anderson's eyes were extremely cloudy, glowing with a strange blue-white luster. Him. Do you mean that necromancer? Did he also come to the south? Lara frowned. That person is not to be trifled with. He is a huge problem. Even if you can use the pilgrimage state to predict his movements, we might not be able to take him down. Anderson looked at her cruelly. Shut up, woman. If it weren't for you and Sinwok slacking off last time, we would be celebrating our victory in Rolling Stone Town. Lara wanted to say something. Anderson looked at her maliciously. Don't forget who is the highest commander of this operation. If you dare to disobey my orders, you better hope that I won't survive. Otherwise, I'll hand you over to Father myself, Lara shivered when she heard that. She subconsciously touched her back. After confirming that her spine was still there, she heaved a sigh of relief, but her palms and back were covered in sweat. Emily. Go to the cave entrance and wait for them. Test the quality of his companions. Remember to be careful and focus on your own life. If you can lure them into our trap, you will be the top contributor to this operation. Anderson shook the chains on his body hard. A large amount of magic light flashed. Yes, Lord Avenger. A coquettish voice came from all directions. The atmosphere around the altar suddenly became tense. Only the elephant trunk man asked with anticipation. So, who is the enemy this time? Can I touch his thigh after this? Instigation. It was one of the top spells among the 3 trump cards of the necromancer's power to incite chaos in an army. The 3 spells were Bewitchment, Chaos, and Instigation. It was a very powerful spell. It could forcefully fight for the control of an undead unit with the enemy. This process would last for about 3 to 15 seconds, depending on the intensity of the fight. After 15 seconds, even if the 2 sides were still in a stalemate, the instigation would be considered a failure. However, the most annoying part of this spell was that there was almost no loss after failure. Since the battlefield for control was on someone else's undead, the person who actively cast it would not even suffer from the common punishment of losing focus and weakening spirit. Once it succeeded, the undead who had been instigated to defect would be treated as a temporary unit and directly join the battle. Although temporary units could not self-destruct, when the two armies were fighting, the damage caused by a sudden betrayal in the formation was enough. However, even though it seemed like a good idea to continuously cast instigation, the effect wasn't that great. The continuous use of instigation will have a significant diminishing effect. In layman's terms, the second unit that had been instigated to defect would often require a higher judgment value to successfully pry it away from the original owner, and the third unit would be even more difficult. Generally, when the 7th or 8th undead was instigated, the effect of free instigation would be so weak that even a tier 1 mage could resist it. Therefore, it was not suitable to use it against the undead army. Instead, it was a godly skill against a small group of undead. What was even more amazing was that the unit that was instigated to defect was a temporary contract. It didn't matter if the undead was broken or became crippled. In any case, the undead could be fired at any time. It did not take up the contract slot, did not consume mana, and at most, he would have to pay a little mental strength and negative energy. Praise the eternal undead girl. At this moment, Matthew sincerely sang the praises of Dania's name in his heart. This spell was too important. He did not expect to be able to instigate a legendary unit to rebel, but there was still a great chance of getting a few bone dragons to turn on their owners. From what Zaye said, there seemed to be several bone dragons working under Blinken. Matthew's eyes flashed with a beautiful longing. However, he was soon freed from his thoughts. Matthew spent nearly 5 minutes before he finally explained to Bobo that he wasn't really eating SHT after that. Zaye's voice came from outside. "Mr. Matthew. You might need to come out and take a look." Matthew quickly walked out. Following Zaye's guidance, he saw a figure wandering alone in the north of the camp. "She followed us all the way." Zaye sized up Matthew and Miss Zombie with a complicated expression. "I know. Let me salivate it." Matthew's heart skipped a beat. Miss Zombie was lucky. Due to her remote location, she was not sucked away by the heavenly sphere of the death. She became one of the few undead who were still wandering in the swamp. This might be the command that Dania had given them before she left. Matthew had not been able to deal with her before, mainly because she had already signed a contract with another necromancer. He was not confident that he could poach her from Dania. Things were different now. He planned to try to persuade her to defect. So he walked over gently and greeted Miss Zombie. "Hello, we meet again. I'm very grateful for your help that night." Matthew smiled. Miss Zombie looked at him in confusion. After a moment, she suddenly bit him. Matthew hurriedly stepped back to avoid it and then used instigation on her. Hint, the instigation has been successful. You have obtained temporary control over the stupid zombie. You will have the right to use her for 72 hours. Miss Zombie immediately froze. That simple. Matthew was also stunned. However, he quickly realized that no matter what Dania had done, she had little control over the undead there. In the process of his instigation, he did not encounter any resistance at all. Perhaps this had something to do with the zombie lady's subconscious willingness to cooperate with him. It was just that this kind of successful rebellion had lost the pleasure of possession. Matthew thought dully. It's a pity that Big Brother Abomination has flown away. Otherwise, it would be more interesting if I could persuade him to defect. After dealing with Miss Zombie, Zaye walked over and said, "When I was patrolling the surroundings of the camp just now, I used some of my methods to track the whereabouts of the Dragon Lich cult. I found that not only was Blinken not in the rainforest, but the other Dragon Lich cult members had also disappeared. This is obviously unreasonable." He analyzed seriously. Blinken can teleport himself, but he doesn't have the technology to teleport many people, so I suspect that they're hiding. Matthew nodded. He understood what Zayuya meant. The Dragon Lich sect definitely wasn't hiding from him. They had another motive. So Matthew tried to communicate with the Black Banyan Dream. Very quickly, a gentle voice rang in everyone's ears, Undercity. Zaye revealed an enlightened expression. "I know that there are 2 or 3 entrances to the Undercity nearby. The one closest to the swamp used to be the territory of a group of black-backed gnoll, but the last time I went to check, the gnoll had already disappeared." Do we need to follow them?" Lumiere walked over, indicating that he was in good condition and could continue on his journey. Matthew looked at Bobo again. The latter had already put on her armor again, and the right glove was replaced with a fire-resistant glove. Bombs and lightning gloves aren't all the tricks that an arcane machinist can use. I still have 998 ways to kill the people of the Dragon Lich sect. Bobo said confidently. Then, everyone turned to Matthew. Matthew looked up at the sky. The sun was setting, and half the sky was dark. A waning moon was vaguely hanging on the branches of the rainforest. Then let's go over and take a look. There's no need to chase too closely. I've invited 2 experts. When they come, we'll have a better chance of winning against Blinken. Matthew patted the badge on his chest and said. 40 minutes later. In a narrow and damp underground passage. The group moved sideways. It took them a long time to pass through the gap between the 2 huge rocks. The underground space in front of them suddenly opened up. The stone stairs leading down were obviously man-made. There were messy murals on the side, as well as a small number of tools and living supplies. It was not hard to guess that this was once the territory of a group of black-backed gnoll. There should be another exit in this undercity. With the size of the black-backed gnoll, they will not be able to pass through this place. The gnoll in this camp were probably killed by Matthew, so he knew their physical condition very well. Zayi agreed. Most of the undercities under the rainforest extend in all directions. Although there aren't many creatures here, they have inherited the cunning of the rainforest creatures. As far as I know, there are at least 3 roads leading to the surface. This is the closest one, and it's relatively safe. Even so, there are always dangers lurking in the underground world. I remember that there are many vampire bats hiding in the road ahead. It's best if everyone doesn't use torches because they especially like to attack people who hold torches. I have a certain level of dark vision, so why don't you let me go first? But you must remember to support me at all times. I really don't have confidence in my combat standards. The group discussed for a while and decided to adopt Zayayi's suggestion. They extinguished the torches and used a rope to connect the 4 wrists. If anything unusual happened, they could shake the rope violently to inform their companions. It was also very convenient to break free of the rope if necessary. Zayayi took the lead. Matthew followed closely behind. He took out the Ring of Desire from his inventory and put it on. In his pitch-black vision, a grayish-white outline suddenly appeared. This was the effect of dark vision. The Ring of Desire could provide 10 points of dark vision, which meant that Matthew could now see the dark environment in front of him. It was blurry if they were further away. In the Undercity, equipment that could enhance dark vision was always in demand. The effect of the Ring of Desire was immediate. However, its other use was equally annoying. After wearing it, you really don't have any desire at all. If Heart of Tranquil Water only helps you resist the temptation from the outside world, then wearing this Ring of Desire is equivalent to directly completing the psychological castration. Matthew spun the ring a little uncomfortably. As they went deeper into the Undercity, the team gradually fell silent. Only the rustling of footsteps could be heard. If not for the occasional shaking of the rope, everyone would have thought that their companions had been swallowed by the endless darkness. About half an hour later, Zayayi's relieved voice came from ahead. We've already passed the vampire bats territory. There should be some fungus man villages ahead. They're not a threat to us. We can light the torches for a while. If the surface creatures suddenly enter the Undercity and can't see the light for a long time, they will have hallucinations. As he spoke, he lit his torch first. However, in the next second, Matthew, who was about 15 meters away from him, shouted in surprise. Watch your back. Zayayi reacted quickly. He didn't turn back but took a sudden step forward, attempting to pull away from the monster behind him. However, the other party was even faster. Matthew only saw a white light flash past. The shadow pounced on Zayayi from behind and instantly disappeared. Zayayi staggered. When he got up, he patted his chest and said in a frightened voice. What pushed me earlier? Fortunately, I'm fine. Before he could finish his sentence, his eyes began to roll back rapidly, emitting an abnormal light. Hee, come and kiss me. Zayayi's voice suddenly became extremely soft. He rushed towards Matthew, hugged him, and kissed Matthew in an extremely rude manner. Matthew didn't say anything and raised his leg to kick Zayayi. However, this kick was like kicking an iron plate. Not only did it not kick the other party away, but Matthew staggered. Fortunately, this somewhat delayed Zayayi's bestial nature. Lumiere arrived in time. He grabbed Zayayi's shoulder and pressed him against the wall. Matthew focused his eyes. Warning, your partner Zayayi has been invaded by Charm Soul. All of his attributes have been temporarily absorbed by Charm Soul by 1/4. Once a Charm Soul kisses you for more than 3 seconds, 1/4 of your attributes would be temporarily absorbed by the Charm Soul. Charm Soul. Matthew's expression was solemn. As a necromancer, he knew that this was an extremely terrifying undead creature. Don't be fooled by its name. This thing was at least tier 4, and its potential destructive power was even far greater than that of the bone dragons, dark warriors, and other fierce undead. The main problem was its ability to absorb its target's attributes. Even though the effect was temporary, if she took a kiss out of everyone, ordinary adventure teams would definitely be wiped out. Why is he so strong? Lumiere exclaimed. Even with his physical fitness, he couldn't take down the charm Zai. This made him quickly realize that things were not that simple. Matthew didn't have time to explain. He quickly pulled out the long whip at his waist. Let me whip him. Although Lumiere was puzzled, he still had unconditional trust in Matthew's command. At that moment, he used all his strength to turn Zai's body around while his back was pressed against the wall. Hurry up. During this process, Lumiere was shocked to find that his arms were trembling. Come and kiss me, Zai said coquettishly. His mouth even pressed against his. Get lost, Lumiere roared. At this moment, Matthew, who had hurriedly grabbed Ursul's reprimand, finally lashed out for the first time in his life. Pa. The snake scales on the whip ruthlessly scrapes Zai's back. The latter's clothes immediately split open, and the skin on his back also split open. Ah, Matthew, you got me too, Lumiere wailed. Matthew comforted him. Sorry, I'll try my best to whip accurately. As he spoke, he lashed out with his whip again. Bang. A white light was drawn out from Zai's body. Hint, you have used Ursul's reprimand to hit your partner, Zai. Dispel undead and reprimand undead are in effect. You have successfully expelled Charm Soul, level 16/rare elite. Matthew heaved a sigh of relief and then raised it again. He saw the Charm Soul emerge from Hugh's chest and pierce Lumiere's chest. The latter realized that something was wrong and subconsciously roared. I'm the man who wants to become the king of the rainforest. No evil spirit or ghost can possess me. At this moment, Zai, who was in front of him, woke up in a daze. What happened? Before he could ask for an explanation, he saw Lumiere in front of him, and Lumiere grabbed Zai as if he was going to gobble him up. Help! Zai struggled violently, but Lumiere easily pressed him against the wall. Lumiere's breath and lips were getting closer and closer. Zai's eyes were filled with despair. He closed his eyes. A crisp smack sounded beside his ear. After that, there were 2 more whipping sounds. Ah, Matthew, you hit me too. Zai, who was pressed against the wall, shouted in pain. However, how could Matthew be in the mood to care about this? This charm soul had displayed a terrifying ability to continuously possess people's bodies as well as an extremely terrifying speed. The long whip in his hand might be her only nemesis. He had to constantly be on guard against the other party. If he were charmed, then everything would be over. Endure it. I don't believe that she's completely immune to dispel undead. Matthew knew that this was not the time to be merciful. He gritted his teeth and ruthlessly whipped the 2 people who were hugging each other. Pa. 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 The crisp whipping sound, the 2 people's alternating wails, and the occasional panting of the charm soul mixed together, echoing in the cave for a long time. 10 seconds later, Matthew suddenly felt the badge become hot. The goddess of moonlight had sent him a message that Matthew needed moonlight. Matthew didn't say anything else. He wiped his badge and activated moonlight spell. After that, he continued to whip the 2 of them. In the next second, a ray of moonlight shone in the cave. 2 figures slowly appeared. After the teleportation was completed, the duo from Rolling Stone Town saw this ridiculous scene at a glance. Matthew was sweating profusely and panting as he lashed his whip. Near the cave wall, the 2 men were hugging each other. They did not dodge Matthew's whip and occasionally made strange sounds. Seeing this, Lee Wiki subconsciously touched his bald head. Wow. Rugger, did we come at the wrong time? Earlier, in the oak forest north of Rolling Stone Town, Lee Wiki, who was empty-handed, and Rieger, who was carrying bags, walked to the agreed location. It was already nighttime. The oak forest was silent. Occasionally, the howling of zombies could be heard from underground. It's been a long time since I left Rolling Stone Town for an adventure. This reminds me of when I was young. I was only 16 or 17 years old, no more than 18 years old. That was how I left my hometown with my luggage. I was filled with anticipation for the future and embarked on an adventure, Rieger said emotionally. Lee Wiki looked at him strangely. Is this why you didn't use the storage ring and insisted on carrying all your luggage? Has our lord, who has been pampered for so many years, finally begun to reminisce about the past? Rieger looked at him. I thought you would help me share some of the burden. Li Wiki said seriously. Everyone has their own cultivation. Forgive me for not being able to share your burden. Rieger could not help but roll his eyes at him. After walking for a while, he finally could not help but stuff the largest bag into his storage ring. But this way, it doesn't feel like an adventure. It's more like a vacation. Rieger sighed. I don't think the people of the Dragon Lich sect will agree with you. Li Wiki smiled. Right, Rieger, I heard about Sif and Matthew. Rieger suddenly became sensitive. What do you think? Li Wiki asked curiously. I think they are very compatible. Clang. Rieger pulled out a huge sword that was flashing with a cold light and placed it on Li Wiki's neck. Although they're very compatible, Matthew is a poor necromancer. He's not compatible with our pure and sacred little princess of Rolling Stone Town, so in the end, I still object to this marriage. Li Wiki said righteously. Also, regarding this matter, I have a suggestion for you in this operation. Rieger took away his sword. Tell me. Li Wiki suggested, you can work hard and use your ability to save Matthew's life. It's best if you can get injured. Rieger's heart skipped a beat. He put away his sword and pondered. What do you mean? Li Wiki smiled evilly. In that case, he owes you a favor. With Matthew's moral sense, as long as you continue to oppose it, he will continue to feel guilty when he and your daughter date in the future. As time passed, this guilt would make him completely lose interest in Sif. How was it? Isn't it a brilliant idea? Lage's body trembled as he looked deeply at Li Wiki. This is not a bad idea. Sometimes, I really suspect that you are a warrior monk reincarnated from a devil. How could you think of such a cunning and vicious plan? Li Wiki shrugged. Don't make personal attacks, Rieger. The truth is that I'm much smarter than you. Rieger did not refute this point but continued to question. So, you're smarter than me. And is that why you can break the precinct so crazily? I heard that you're notorious in the coastal city. You've almost eaten the turtles in many places until they became extinct. This doesn't conform to the precepts of a monk, does it? Speaking of turtles. Li Wiki's face suddenly turned green. Don't mention it. I feel like vomiting when I hear the word turtle. Rieger laughed and said. Ate too much of them. Li Wiki nodded. There's nothing we can do. You know that we, the Divine Dragon Sect disciples, are different from other monks. While we try our best to abide by the precepts, we also have to imitate the actions of the super creatures. And the thing that the creation named Coiling Dragon that I imitated likes to eat the most is sea turtles. I really have no choice. Even if I don't like it, I have to bite the bullet and eat them. Rieger was shocked. So, how many sea turtles did you eat to reach the Tier 5 realm? Li Wiki said uncertainly, tens of thousands. I can't remember. If the turtle egg counts, it's 100,000. Rieger thought for a moment. Then it's not easy for you either. It's not easy. Li Wiki complained, do you know why I haven't become a legend? Rieger asked, is it related to Coiling Dragon? Li Wiki said bitterly. That's right. Other than eating turtles, that guy also liked to breed new races. Rieger did not react for a moment. After a few seconds, he burst out laughing. I can't imitate this at all. Li Wiki touched his bald head helplessly. Even if I dare to break my abstinence, the genetic genes of human beings cannot easily break through the reproductive barrier like the dragons and create new races at will. I'm trapped on this point. Rieger joked. This is indeed not easy to solve. With your financial resources, not many women are willing to have children with you. Li Wiki could not help but say venomously. Yes. There were women who were willing to have children with you, but they ran away. Rieger fell silent. I'm sorry. I went a little overboard. Li Wiki immediately apologized. It is said that the third characteristic of Coiling Dragon is to speak without filter. I'm a little too immersed in the character, Rieger. Rieger stared at him fiercely. I will forgive you, Li Wiki, but only after I kill you. As he spoke, he raised his sword and chased after Li Wiki. Clang. Clang. The big sword and the diamond body collided violently, and sparks flew in all directions in the oak forest. Gentlemen, we should set off. Like and subscribe.